When I started out in foreign missions in my mid-20s, I defined missions very narrowly as ministry only for those serving overseas. I felt that real missions was global missions that happened in the host culture, working with native ethnic groups, immigration services, local city outreach, prison ministry, food banks, campus ministry, and disaster relief, all would fall outside of missions. Missions was service in a host country outside of your birth country, and that was it, period. This topic of defining missions has grown in popularity quite a bit since Spitters and Ellison published their book, When Everything is Missions. I wholeheartedly agreed with them that categorizing everything outside of ministry that happened at a church on site as missions greatly increased the possibility that global missions would become a subsection of a section and likely forgotten. The home base would remain the primary concern and vital task to keep moving forward at all costs. I heard a pastor applaud his congregation for how well they did financially during their time not gathering in person as they experienced COVID, because they did not have to discontinue giving to any of their missions. What this communicated to me immediately is that this church sees missions as secondary or tertiary, and will be the first thing to lose interest in if things start to go south for the church. This incident, to me, confirms the fear that a big, undefined category of missions, of which global missions is a small part, will lead to limited interest and care, and the haunting statistics of 1.7% of missions giving going to work among unreached people, and the 38 most unevangelized countries receiving only 0.1% of all giving will either continue or even worsen. The trouble I have with Spitters and Ellison is that they seem to define missions almost too narrowly to outreach among unreached and/or unengaged people groups. The reason I want to push back against this is that there are all sorts of legitimate global outreach happening in countries around the world. We do not want these to get lost as all churches try to pivot to make up for the lack of funding for the least reached. When I came back to my birth country and moved on to working with internationals there, I lost at least one supporting church in the transition based on their definition of missions as outreach in a host country outside of birth country. I couldn't argue with this because I too had consistently defined missions like this. However, what I found was that many of the same unreached people groups were accessible outside of their home countries living in my own. Now, I admit that I worked in this capacity for a number of years before I felt that tug at my heart to go abroad again. The reason being that there were others seeking to connect with these same individuals I worked with. And this was not the case for the families and friends of these people living in their own home countries. What I also discovered is that I had, through these years of interactions, created a list of legitimate contacts with people from a number of unreached countries that gave me a potential person of peace, to get a foot in the door of every one of their nations, many of which are openly hostile to the gospel. This experience challenged my own narrow definition of missions that I held to for over a decade. It's not as clear-cut as I had once concluded. While I agree that missions should be kept to global to ensure that the majority world does not become a footnote in my own native brethren's attention, the line for global also cannot be narrowed to just ministry that happens within a host country. The reason being that ministry among internationals in one's birth country opens the door wide to the unreached peoples and/or countries of the unengaged peoples of the world. Now, whenever a person comes to me interested in foreign missions and is looking for the next step, I do not hesitate to encourage them that the first step must be making friends with foreigners around them and finding out through everyday encounters through these people, which people group God is leading them to. For the Western Christian, this will most likely be the migrant or immigrant neighbor. For others in the majority world, it may be a minority group in country that has similar customs to foreign unreached and/or unengaged people groups, such as the Muslims living life among the majority Chinese Christians. Foreign missions is not so foreign any longer, and one can start right where they are.